Godak Grevling Clan. Um, okay, so today we're gonna. What I'm gonna do here is kind of bounce off of some of the stuff I've just been listening to from the Politics Social channel. Um, Graham Hughes and Phil Morehouse from a different bias have a Friday, pretty much every Friday they have a debate basically about uh, how Labour's doing. And I don't know if I'm gonna get a lot of people kind of on board with the way I'm thinking, but so I'm just gonna lay out how for any newcomers, just lay out how I got into politics. Okay, for me, I only politics only started getting onto my radar around Brexit years. Um, and I only really started paying attention after Brexit. It was about 2018, 2019 when I really started paying attention. And I, for me, my background before that was I'm into even like my main interest is evolution, the study of evolution, the study of the history of life on this planet. That's been my main interest, like pretty much all of my life. Now, don't get me wrong, I like lots of other things as well, but I'm interested in knowledge as well, lots of other different things. But it's my primary knowledge base is zoology and paleontology. So when I came to approach politics, I had no idea whether I was left or right. You know, I I was kind of getting into the neo-pagan thing at that point. And when I say the neo-pagan thing, I hadn't really. I was still kind of agnostic about gods at that point. Um, I had a feeling if they did exist, then it would be just some sort of energy. But I go into that in a very early video. I might go into it again at some point because it's been coming up again in my mind, and my contact with Frigg, and it hasn't completely put my mind off of the concept. But either way, but the people that were in the community of neo pagans, um, were what I would now consider to be socially liberal, um, more likely to be economically left, and so when I got into politics, it was at a time when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge of the Labour Party. And the Tories didn't fucking speak to me in the slightest. If there's one thing I had paid attention to when it came to politics was the worsening standard of living every single year since I left school, basically, which was like 2010, 2011. Now, for me, at the time, again, this is brand new joining politics, getting into politics. Like, a lot of what he was saying was, I was like, yeah, I like it. I like everything he's saying. You know, support for people who are in my position. You know, free housing as an end goal. These are ideals I'm on board with. And then we got to the 2019 general election. Now, I had done as much as possible up until that point to try and catch up with 300 odd years of political history in this country. Now, I grew up learning about history. You know, my mum's well into her she likes her history stuff herself, so I grew up around that stuff. But political history, I didn't really know about. So I went on a binge of, watching university lectures and loads of YouTube videos and whatnot about politics, and watching loads of different debates, and so that's how I first found out about Sky News, when they did debate debate programs during the evening. It's where I first saw Nick Ferrari. And that's where I first come across Owen Jones. And the way I understood it, the way it was put to me, the way the whole EU Brexit stuff came across to me, just as someone who was a political novice, was that it was all a load of bollocks. I saw that from the start. I never felt easy about Brexit, and when I looked at, I always had this thing about actually looking at the facts. And Brexit was always bollocks. It was always lies. And it wasn't until, I would say about the time when Johnson had Rees-Mogg go to prorogue Parliament illegally, unlawfully. It was about that time that I was really going, hang on, isn't Boris Johnson the guy who I remember in 2012 from the Olympics getting stuck on a fucking wire? Why the fuck is he Prime Minister? I had a bit of a break slightly before I got back into politics, before I started paying attention again. Stuff happened. But I'm like, Boris Johnson is our Prime... What the fuck? And then we get to the winter, and the Tories are going, let's just have an election. And I'm like, no. But we had an election. And I went and argued with fuck ton of people, more people than I've ever had to argue with before when it comes to anything, apart from nutcases who still refuse to accept that evolution is it's just a fact of life. I had so many arguments within the space of a month. I was having arguments with family members. My mum, who's fairly socially liberal, she didn't trust Corbyn. I still don't understand what her position is. She just didn't trust him. She didn't believe that he'd get, in her own words, she didn't believe that he would get done what he said he would. And that's kind of a fairly consistent one I heard quite a lot when I was arguing with people over who should be Prime Minister, Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn. Now, even to this day, I will still argue that Jeremy Corbyn would have been better for us. But, there you go. You know, that's how it is. We come at, you know, I got into arguments with people on the left. Well, on the left. There's other socially liberal lefties who would attack me because I identified as a neo-pagan. Again, I hadn't quite yet had my communion with a god, with a goddess, technically. And I'm like, I thought this side was the side that was supposed to be welcoming, the side that's supposed to be, you know, compassionate, empathetic. But no, because I was of a group that the left apparently doesn't like, I got, and still do, get hounded for it. Treated as inferior. Even more now, since I truly do actually believe in the gods. Now, by this point, I'd become a Labour Party member. And I was still a Labour Party member up until the beginning of this year. Of this Christian year. And I've been feeling a bit more like someone from who would argue from the inside of the party against what the mainstream positions were. I felt that was important. I still do. I like, for those who are willing to brave it out and stick to the party, like, go for it. But I'd never seen, in the time I got into politics, I'd never seen my party be in government. Like, when I was growing up, I had Labour in government. Well, I mean, first 4 years of my life, it was Tories, and then it was Labour all the way up until pretty much the year I left school, I think, around that time. And ever since, my adult life has been under the Tories, and it's just everything just got worse. And then we get into the pandemic, and oh my fucking gods, like, I nearly died from A/H1N1, swine flu, in 2008. And so, when I first started hearing the rumours in early November 2019, I was extraordinarily worried. This was another reason. This is one of the main reasons when they decided to go for the election. I was like, no. Needless to say, this was over my mouth wherever I went. Until the proper face masks the better face masks came into role, and I could put one of them on, and then put this over the top, and then another one over the top. Besides the point, I watched Boris Johnson's government be so inept. I was reading the science journals as the pandemic was happening. Every month, when new information came up, I was one of the first. I was one of the first people around amongst the people I know, where I am, who was onto the details, and it was horrific. The scientists, and I mean, my sociology GCSE really started to kick in around 2020 because I started paying attention. I wasn't just angry, I was really starting to pay attention. And I was looking at different groups of people and seeing the way that they interacted with one another, even behind closed doors, online. But I watched people actively start mistrusting science. And so often I kept hearing from conservative MPs, why should we trust experts? Now, as someone who grew up, as for the majority of their life, was only paying attention to things of scientific matters, this wasn't just ridiculous, this was scary. I was starting to get the hang of what rhetoric was. I started listening to, I was starting to really get into the university lectures on political history. Really starting to pay attention. And the more and more this went on, the angrier and angrier I got. And it was getting to a point where I was getting so frustrated, and I have autism myself, and it manifests in several different ways. But one of those ways is that I will hyperfixate, and my God, if it's something that I'm also pissed about, it will just not stop, and it's causing my mum problems, and my friends problems. Like it was causing people around me issues because I get into arguments that I need to get into. Or I'd start an argument where a debate was what was needed. And I kept looking, I was like, of course I was angry. I had every fucking right to be angry, especially at people who voted for Brexit. Which led us to the point of having Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister. I just, it's where I finally joined in on the on the real falling out, with family. When it came to Brexit, I was a bit late to the party on that, but that's when I really started having. I'd had arguments before, as I said, but for me, I was having these arguments non-stop, and I was upsetting a lot of people. But the more and more that I had these arguments and slowly debates got slowly I came around to having debates rather than fucking shouting at people. But again, the sociology GCSE started kicking in. So I started to try and see things from another perspective. And it was around this time that I also had my communion with Frege. And I was able to look at the situation after that with what I can only describe as more patience. Because I have come to this I had come to this realization that to really understand politics, you have to try and understand your like other people's positions. Even if you don't agree with it, you have to see if you can try and understand those positions to legitimately put arguments against it, to refute it in a way that can convince others. And I have managed to convince others away from the right, away from the right wing slot. It's not often that I do win, but I have done it, and it's because I had started to see my political ideology as wanting to make things better, but realizing that trying to force it through will have repercussions, probably violent repercussions. I'm a socialist. So if you name out a whole bunch of socialist policies or socialist adjacent policies, I'm likely to agree with it, at least to a point. But that's the other thing. Balance became an obsession for me. Because, and not necessarily 50-50 balance, but a balance seemed to be necessary. And it still does to me. Because, and this one has been consistent with me, absolutism is bullshit. It's nearly always more nuanced than you think it is. Challenge on me on it if you think it. When people try to, call others racist, for example, are they racist, or are they naive? And do they hang around people who are racist, but are they naive and are not aware that what the people are that they are around more often than not are racist? You might think that's absurd, but I guarantee you that it's real. I've seen it. And then, Liz Truss takes over. Wow, that was a whirlwind, wasn't it? Liz dies. Charlie takes over. And then Rishi Sunak takes over from Liz Truss. And there was a part of me that was like, I kind of can't believe that's happened. But I was also copping on to the idea of tokenism. So, I started to watch videos on YouTube and talk to people who knew more about economics around this time as well. And I didn't want to have an anal knowledge of economics. I just needed a broad understanding of it to help me with my evolving political ideology. I'm still someone who would consider myself a socialist. A socialist. I want to see cooperative businesses. I want to see massive wealth redistribution, socialized healthcare, nationalized services across the board. Government structures that aren't so top heavy, that aren't really as nearly as top heavy in Westminster, like properly devolved powers. Workers, I see. Workers' rights is one that, you know, if you're not for workers' rights, then you're someone who doesn't actually work. You ain't, more often than not, you're someone who is more enamored of someone who gets passive income through the work of others and gets rich off it. Now, I'm not wealthy. I have things, but the majority of these, and I'm promising you this, the majority of these things in this room, I did not buy. They were gifts. Including the bloody posters. So, yeah. I was in 2020, last year I was starting to, nail on where I kind of was politically. And then Labour go and get scared in the run-ups to the election when it comes to trans rights. And I'm like, what are you doing? And they started sounding a bit wishy-washy on environmentalism. I was like, and then I got to see the manifesto, and that kind of allayed nearly most of my fears when it comes to the environment, because to me, the environment is my core point when it comes to my politics. Again, you got to remember that I'm starting from a point not of being, having anything that's social that was my main thing that I thought about, but the natural world was the main thing. Mostly still is the main thing I want to think about. Politics is now a close second, in close joint seconds with my gods, I should say. But either way, the environmentalism was the Tories, which it was spiraling out of control. And then Labour win the election, and I was like, okay, let's see what happens, because during the election, I had a lot of fellows on the left telling me the Labour are going to be absolutely terrible. They're not going to do anything you want. And I turned around and said, I remember saying this, I expect to get around 40 to 60% on the good end of what I expect from the Labour government. Considering what I've seen in the bills that have gone into that have gone into Parliament and going through Parliament, that's pretty much what I'm getting so far. Now, when I look back, I consider myself to have been a fairly impatient person when it came to politics. Now, I wasn't someone who thought that we could get immediate change. That always sounded ridiculous to me. Whenever someone said, "Oh, this is a simple answer to this," and I thought, I bet it's not that simple. I bet it's not that simple. I bet it's going to cost a lot of effort and hard work, and I bet there will be consequences and repercussions. But but even but besides that, back then I did even then I would consider myself to have been fairly impatient back then. I would consider myself to have been someone who, if I was that person right now, I would be screaming at the government constantly. Why the fuck aren't you doing this? Why the fuck aren't you doing that? But the more and more I've paid attention, the more and more I've learned, the more and more I'm at a position now where I'm convinced to, for the most part, sit back and wait to see how the legislation actually affects people. I left the party because of the trans rights issue. That's why I left. I've not been convinced to rejoin, but neither does that mean that I have wholly condemned the party. The reason being is because I'm not an absolutist. Now you can bitch at me all you want about this, but I could be pro-trans or pro-trans rights, however you want to put it, pro-everyone's rights, pretty much, apart from rapists and pedos and whatnot. You get my point. But at the same time, I can recognise the potential good of what may be coming with Labour's legislation, with at least 50 to 60% of Labour, 40 to 60% of Labour's legislation going through right now, I think may actually do a lot good. And I am also convinced of the argument that the main issue is comms, communications. I am convinced that is the biggest problem with Labour. Second behind being the advisors that are advising the government, they need to be changed. That they need to go. That I agree with. I'm not convinced about getting rid of Keir Starmer. In a world so unstable, I don't think we should feed it. Especially when with the last Tory government was just unstable. I'm not sure the population is going to be on board with it. I know a lot of people on the left are, but the left thinks it's bigger than it is. We do. We think it's better. We think we're bigger than we are. We're like a wolverine. We're like a badger. We think we're bigger than we are. We will fuck you up if you try us. may cause damage to ourselves in the process because we think we're bigger than we are. It does frustrate the hell out of me that so often centrists will side with the right over the left, considering that what they say they want, the left wants, not the right. Or the social conservatives. But, I don't fucking get that. I really don't understand that. But the point I was getting to was that it's left me, again, as someone who is more patient. Even the stuff that's going on now with Labour, or Labour's fuck-ups and whatnot, it's actually left me more patient. I don't know how long that'll last, but I have gotten to the point where I want to wait. I am willing to wait 1.5 to 2 years to see the legislation pass and be enacted. At this point, it's more like 1.5 years, but you get my point. And, and it's because I have this original mindset of thinking in a lot longer term. Like, a big part of my philosophy is not to get distracted by short-termism. That does not mean that we should not pay attention to the short-term problems. But we can't be distracted by short-term issues costing us in the mid to long term. Because it's exactly the path that we've been going down up till now. If we can just stop doing that, please. Start thinking more mid to long term. Now, I'm hardly in a comfortable position. I make the position that I'm in as comfortable as I can. But I know a lot of people who would look at me and think that I'm in a really not great position in my life. I possibly agree with that to a certain point, but at a certain time, at another level, I'm kind of the least angry I've been in a long time. Which is really strange, considering how, we've got Trump and in America and Labour being idiots over here with fucking Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson, fucking winding up the Nazi bandwagon. And Europe being kind of wishy-washy. Ukraine and yet more increasingly so every single day that I pay attention to this stuff, my view is that I want to see how things happen before I make a decision about how I think the next general election, for example, might go. Because there's so many people constantly going, Labour's lost the next general election. Labour's lost. Refuck are going to win the next general election. It's bang on now. No, it isn't. No, it really isn't. You can argue the toss with me all you like on this. You're not going to convince me that Labour have already lost the next general election. Why? Because we're only a year and a bit into this parliament. What is wrong with you people? I get a little bit annoyed with people who, because Labour have been far from perfect and have caused communities to which I'm allied to, like trans community, a lot of harm. That singular issue should be the issue for everyone, and so Labour will lose. It's like, no, that's a misunderstanding of what the population actually thinks about this stuff. It's quite disgusting, if I'm quite honest, what the population thinks about trans rights at the moment. I mean, this is a trend that's seen in many countries, in Europe and in America, even in Canada. It's nowhere near as bad in Canada, though. Nowhere near as bad. But tell me what you guys think. Are this is kind of where my brain has gone since the end of Graham and Phil's stream an hour ago, nearly. And I really am at a position at the moment where I can't be drawn on who do you think's going to win the next election. I would still say that Labour would win it at the moment. No, I really think they're going to win it. You're not going to convince me of that. Not yet. And the reasoning is because the way few people feel about Labour right now doesn't necessarily matter. I keep getting, but why aren't Labour doing anything to help them now? Do you realise just how many fires Labour have had to put out and are still trying to put out? The Tories literally broke the country. They could have borrowed and invested fucking billions when we had negative interest rates, but they didn't. Because of that, and Brexit, and SARS-CoV-2, Labour have this clusterfuck to deal with. And yet people are going, why haven't you fixed everything yet? Why are you still being shit? Could it be because the job is a lot harder than it ordinarily would be? And it's an extraordinarily stressful job? Probably. I think that's I'm right on that one. Now, does this mean that I sympathise completely with the government? No. I left the Labour Party. But I'm sorry, I do have a nuanced view. And I can be really angry at Labour for their trans position, but still go, you know what? Like, for the most part, on environmental policy, they've been pretty good so far. We'll see what happens in the next 2 years. As I said, year and a half to 2 years. I am not an absolutist. And because of that, I can't be on the extremes when it comes to this until things actually happen. So most of what's going on right now is rhetoric. Now, again, the trans stuff I'm dead against. It's again why I left the party. But I'm not going to lambaste the government when it's done some good. And I'm not going to make my expectations unrealistic. That's the other thing I was saying consistently before and during and after the election last year. Is that, for me, this government was always going to be a work in progress. And I damn well knew that they were going to have a real hard time of it. Really doesn't help, though, that they've gone and made it harder on them fucking selves. That one, I was expecting up to a point, not to the level that they're at. Like, wow. But again, I want to see the legislation go through. Because I want to know whether or not this legislation will actually have major beneficial effects. Because I know damn well how much people in the communities I live in, that I've lived in, depended on the Sure Start centres. Bringing them back, really, 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 really noticed. It really will be. And I'm hoping that a lot of the workers and renters' rights stuff will have actual noticeable effects. It will take time to implement, but when it is implemented and comes into effect, I want to see what the actual effects are, what the consequences are, whether it does enough, whether it probably won't do too much, but just whether it does enough or whether it comes nowhere near enough. But I feel frustrated more and more with my own side, and I can't consider myself a centrist because I don't align with the right wing or the social conservatives. But I'm getting frustrated more and more with my own side because all I'm hearing is Labour are going to lose the next election. Labour are wholly bad. They're completely terrible. They're absolutely shit. There's nothing good about them. When that quite patently isn't true. On an objective basis. Not only that, but I do just on the intuition. I don't feel like calling an election 4 years out is wise or intelligent. It's not something that I feel is a necessary point to bring up at this point. We're nowhere near an election. Why are you going on about election? What's the point? You're trying to make a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because those do happen. More often than you'd think. Now, for trans people, I'm not going to argue because they have every right to be angry. But for others, I'm sorry, but like, I mean, I saw my benefits go up. I've had more and more people tell me they can get access to the doctor more easily. I, these are actually, things that people notice. And even though the government has been really shit at communicating it, people have noticed it nonetheless. I'm sorry, but if they haven't in your area, then okay. But like more and more often, I hear people tell me that they're able to that their pay has gone up. That they don't feel like they're struggling quite as much. That they can actually access their GP. And for those who are interested in environmental problems, it's like, are they going anywhere near far enough? Not quite yet. But again, they've only been in for a year and a half. I want to see the effects of the legislation they're pushing through. It does just. I think for a while, it's going to be quite annoying. I'm going to be quite annoying for people because they're going to be going, well, do you think Labour are doing good yet? Well, I don't know. They're doing shit on communications. They're doing really not a great job when it comes to rhetoric. But I don't know when it comes to legislation, which is, to me, the actual important bit. So, what do you guys think? Am I going down the wrong path? Do you think that my position is, one that is a sensible one? Do you think I'm being naive? And I tell you, I've been thinking a lot about where I sit on these different problems. Especially when it comes to Labour, where do I sit? And it's complicated. I have a very nuanced view when it comes to Labour. Does having nuance make me naive? Let me know what you guys think, Badgers. Sorry it's been so long. I've not been all that well, but I feel better. I said that last time. I do actually feel better though. So hopefully I'll be able to get on with fucking reacting to Ed Miliband. 2 lots of Ed Miliband. And I need to get back to start the defence stuff. And I need to carry on with the EnviroVids. And at some point, I need to get around to doing more audiobook, or not audiobook, more book vids. There's so much I want to do, but my mind is a complete mess. So yeah, praise, love and blessing, Badgers. My shield and sword at your service. And look after yourselves. Blessed be.